Chapter 1. A house that watched itself. The first time I saw Greystone Hollow, it was the chair that caught my eye. Not grand or ornate, it was a simple, worn wooden chair. Yet it sat with peculiar intent against the far wall of the drawing room. It faced neither the fire, nor the garden, nor the center where conversation might flow. It faced the wall squarely, like a person who had turned away from the world. Hercule Poirot and I had arrived at the estate in late September, invited by Sir Hugo Drake, a retired colonial official with a taste for Turkish cigarettes, intricate board games, and riddles masquerading as hospitality. His letter to Poirot, marked strictly confidential, had hinted at domestic unease and an unnatural intuition, but made no mention of crime. Poirot, naturally, was intrigued. I had anticipated something more dramatic, perhaps a manor shrouded in fog or a frantic servant at the gate, but Greystone Hollow stood calm and cold under a pale sky. Its stone chimneys rose like forgotten gravestones. The house itself, perhaps 17th century. Enduring not out of pride, but out of spite, a tall, pinched man in a dark suit answered the door. His silver hair was oiled back tightly, his expression one of perpetual disappointment. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, ignoring my outstretched hand. "Captain Arthur Hastings," I offered, but he merely continued, "Sir Hugo is expecting you in the morning room." "And you are, monsieur?" Poirot asked. "Lane. I have been Sir Hugo's manservant for 22 years. Poirot gave a small bow. "Loyalty such as that is rare. You ought to be congratulated, Monsieur Lane." Lane offered no reply, only turned and gestured for us to follow. The morning room to the right of the entrance hall was a long, sunken chamber with narrow windows and oak-paneled walls. In one corner stood an odd collection: a bronze elephant, an antique globe, a chessboard carved in ivory and jet. Near the hearth stood Sir Hugo himself, shorter than I'd imagined height, but with sharp eyes and squared shoulders that suggested he still commanded distant armies and forgotten provinces. His white mustache was clipped to points like a hawk's wings, and he leaned on a cane topped with a silver cobra's head. He sized us up as if assessing our worth by the hour. "Poirot," he said, smiling, then coughed. "Thank God. And Hastings, of course." "Welcome, Sir Hugo," Poirot said warmly. "We are honored, though I must confess, Sir Letter was, how shall I say, enigmatic, even for one of your reputation." Sir Hugo chuckled, then coughed again. "You'll forgive an old man his theatrics. Come, sit. There's sherry in the cabinet, if you'll have it." "I have no urgent crisis to present, only a felinga, damnably persistent feeling." Poirot tilted his head. "Of danger. Game being played, but I don't know the rules, and I'm not even sure who that players are." This, I noticed, was said without any irony, and it hung in the air with more gravity than one might expect from a man who collected puzzles for sport food declined to sherry. "May I ask, who else resides in Thias?" Sir Hugo sank into a wingback chair and gestured, vaguely nigh Judith. "My nephew, Edwin. Their spouses, and a guest or two. Old houses like mine tend to attract dependents, some more welcome than others." "And they are all here now?" asked Pua. "They arrived last week," Sir Hugo said, "all under the pretense of keeping me company. I suspect more than a few hope to inherit something before I'm cold in the ground." He paused. "I'll tell you, frankly, Pierrot, I've not made my will that stirred certain ambitions." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Ah, the subtle war before the reading of the will. It is a classic, sir." Hugo did not smile. "There is a feeling in this house," he said, "of being watched of things. Moves slightly, yet not by the wind. Lane swears. Nothing's been stolen, and yet some objects no longer sit quite where they should. The house has always been a bit strange, but lately I feel as though it's watching me." Or perhaps I'm watching myself. Glanced around the room. It was true. The chair against the wall, the mirror tilted away from the light, the absence of clocks. Something about the place was off-kilter, but not overtly so. Poirot leaned forward. And you suspect one among your household has, how shall we say, ulterior motives? Sir, Hugo's voice grew low. I suspect someone here wants me dead. There was no thunderclap, no dramatic gesture. It's the sound of the wind pushing softly against the window panes. Poirot nodded slowly. Then, Sir Hugo, he said, you were right to call upon me, Hastings, and I will stay as long as necessary. If there is evil here, we shall find it. That is a promise, sir. Hugo met his gaze. You'll find it, Poole. Or it'll find me first. Chapter 2, A Death Before Breakfast. It was not yet 7 when the scream broke through Greystone Hollow. It began high and sharp like the crack of ice, then dissolved into erect moan that trailed off to suddenly the kind of sound that rearranges the silence afterward, forcing every bird to stop its song. I was already half-dressed at one. I heard it. Pooh, of course, was immaculate, as if he'd never slept, stepped into the corridor. Just as a door slammed somewhere below. Then came hurried footsteps, voices overlapping in confusion, and one shrill, well, he's dead. It's really a god. He's dead. Poirot glanced at me, eyes narrowed. Come, Hastings descended the grand staircase to find a small crowd forming outside. Studied 2 women in dressing gowns, 1 man with a slipper half off his foot, and, laying pale and perfectly composed, standing by the door, as if he'd been placed there by its sign. It is Sir Hugo Poirot, asked Lane, note at ease. Sir, miss. Judith found him. I have not allowed anyone inside since she ran out. Poirot stepped past him. That was correct. You did well. Study door creaked as it opened, revealing a room frozen in dread. Heavy curtains, still drawn. A globe toppled, a whiskey glass, untouched, and a thigh-high-backed chair near the hearth. Not the one facing the wall, but its twin, sat Sir Hugo. Drake, his head hung at an unnatural angle, and his cane had fallen to the carpet, but it was the eyes that gave it away, wide open, icy, staring into a fire that had long since gone cold. Poirot stood still for a long moment, hands behind his back. He has been dead for, let us estimate, some hours. No, look, mon ami, there is no blood, no struggle, but note the collar of his hurt. I bent closer. A fine line, most invisible, ran just beneath the Adam's apple knot. Deep, a pressure mark, as though something had been wrapped around his throat. Poirot nodded, groated, I believe, or strangled, very precisely, likely, while seated. Very clever. Very quiet. I stepped back in horror. But who would owe such a thing? He had no enemies. Poirot gave a faint smile. That, Hastings, is what people always say before the reading of the will. We searched the room swiftly, but respectfully. Nothing was obviously missing. No drawer pried open, no papers scattered, and yet Poirot spent nearly 10 minutes studying his desk chair. Hastings, he said finally, do you notice something strange? I looked again. The cushion, precisely thou's been turned. He lifted the cushion gently beneath. It was a single slip of paper folded. Once a torn edge suggested. Haste, Poirot, read it aloud, softly. You'll think the past lies buried, but the chair remembers, or F, no signature. No date, just cryptic message written in a firm, angular hand. The chair, I said. You don't think Poirot's eyes glinted, the one facing the wall? May we? I do think we were interrupted by Lane's voice at the door. Inspector Cray has arrived. Sir Poirot straightened. So soon? Sir Hugo's solicitor contacted the local constabulary. The moment she heard the scream, we exited to find a man already halfway up the stairs, lean sharpied and carrying the aura of someone who had seen far too many early morning corpses. He greeted us briskly. Detective, Chief Inspector Cray, and you must be the famous Hercule Poirot. Bowed. I am flattered. Monsieur, let's keep it simple. Mr. Poirot, you're a guest, dear. Yes, invited by Sir Hugo, who had a vague but urgent suspicion that something was not right in the house. Cray raised an eyebrow, and now he's daedalus, said Poirot solemnly. But yes, Cray exhaled, typical. You always see him top where the bodies are. Pooh inclined his head. It is not I who draws the death, Inspector. It is the death that draws meweth. The hour the household had been assembled in the drawing room. The chair still faced the wall. They came reluctantly and with visible tension. Judith Drake in her mid-30s, proud and sharp-featured. Edwin Drake, the nephew. Eamon, who wore cynicism like a waistcoat, tailored and never out of season. Beside them their spouses. Claudia, small and Moselle-like, with eyes that never stayed still, and Gilbert, round-fried and attempting joviality with an edge authentic. There was also a guest, Miss Felicity Ray, an old friend of Sir Hugg's Well, wore black lace gloves and looked at everyone as if they were a mildly impliant piece of music. Poirot observed them all silently. Inspector Cray spoke first. I'll keep this direct. Sir Hugo Drake is dead. There are signs of strangulation, and until we know more, no one is told to leave the estate. Everyone will be questioned, one by one. There were gasps, objections, mutterings. Edwin scoffed aloud. Surely this is absurd. Uncle was ill. Perhaps he died in his sleep. Cray looked at him and the mark on his throat. Judith stood. My uncle was paranoid. He'd been saying odd things for weeks, talking about voices, shadows. That chair, she pointed, the one against Swall. He said it was moved, that someone was sitting in it when he wasn't looking. Pooh turned to her. And did you believe him, Madame Whistle? She hesitated. I thought he was lonely, tired. He'd lost people, lost years. Pooh smiled gently. Even the tired may be correct. Once did he tell you he feared being murdered? Judith froze. Yes, once last week, but I thought it was just dramatics. Craig stepped forward. Did he name Key? Anyone he suspected? Judith shook her head. No, only that he'd seen something that couldn't be unseen. Poirot turned then, not to her, but to the chair. He walked over to it, slowly studied it, ran a finger down the back, then bent to examine the floor. Benethite. He picked up something tiny, nearly invisible, a thread, thin, pale silk. Pugh turned it in the light and murmured, almost to himself, a chair that faced the Riel, a thread that leads to murder. And with that, the game began. Chapter 3, The Family That Stayed Too Long. Greystone Hollow did not like visitors. I had decided by midday rain had begun to fall. Not a storm, but that constant needling drizzle peculiar to English countryside estates. The kind that never soaks but never stops. The house with its narrow windows and sullen portraits seemed to curl inward on itself as though offended by the fusillade. So too did the people within it, and I took a modest breakfast in the small blue parlor far from the study. Neither of us spoke much. He buttered Earl with mechanical precision in his eyes, unfocused, deep in those mysterious notes of thought he never liked to share too soon. I sipped my tea, watching droplets gather on the Malian glass. You are thinking, mon ami Poirot said finally, of death. I looked at him. I was thinking of how silent the house is now, he said, dabbing his lips. But death brings silence. No, it removes a voice, a law, a cane tapping across stone. And yet, listen. I did. Somewhere above us, faint creaking, then the sound of a door opening slowly, a voice murmuring Thingoni. Again, Pooh nodded. Silence. Lies it pretends, in truth the house is. Listening where? Interrupted by Lane, who stepped into the room like a man entering a court chamber. Inspector Cray requests your presence in the library, sir. We followed. The library was darker than you remembered. A long room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a faint smell of old leather and damp tobacco. Cray stood at the far end. arms folding with suppressed irritation. I've just spoken with a family, all off them, and something stinks. Pooh, raised an eyebrow. In what sense, Inspector? Too many stories too. Many timelines that don't align. Edwin claims he was out walking. At the time of death, Judith says she was writing letters. Claudius swears she was asleep, yet no one saw her retire, and Gilbert Cray shook his head. He admitted, had a bit too much port, and doesn't recall anything clearly. Poirot nodded at convenient. Amnesia. I checked the decanter, said Cray, still 3/4 full. Ickled. So they're all lying. Cray didn't smile. Light. Not funny, Captain Hastings. Huh. One of them is a murderer. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or perhaps more than one. Cray narrowed his gaze. Think it was planned, I think, said Poirot, stepping toward the fireplace. That Sir Hugo was not entirely wrong. This house contains a game, and games, Inspector. How players, Craig sighed. Look, you want to help fine, but don't get in my way. There's too much posturing. Already, he stalked off. Poirot waited until the door closed, then walked to the far bookshelf and ran a finger along a narrow gap behind a globe. He withdrew something small, a brass key. Hastings, he murmured. Observe the dust here. Only this book has been moved recently. The Forgotten Daughters of Empyrean. Our choice. He pressed the spine in a panel. Clit open behind the globe, a hidden drawer. I sat inside were 2 items, a folded letter and a photograph. The photo showed Sir Hugo, much younger, standing beside a woman in a nurse's uniform. They stood beside a strange chair, Theon facing the wall. Only then it faced outward. Pew studied the letter. Next, it was dated 1919, post-war. Dearest Hugo, I know what wedded can never be undone, but you must promise me never let anyone sit in that chair again. You know, while you saw love, always looked at me grave. What do you make of that? Hastings. I frowned. A nurse, a shared secret, a memory they regretted. We, and perhaps a promise broken bare. We could reflect further. Lane reappeared. Miss Drake has asked to see our privately, Mr. Poirot, in the music room. Judith. Drake sat stiffly at the piano hand. We entered, though her fingers did not touch the keys. I thought I should say this in confidence, she began. My uncle trusted you, and he told you he feared someone in the house, didn't he? Pooh bowed slightly. He said so. Yes, Judith exhaled. Then you should know, Uncle changed about. 2 months ago, he began locking his bedroom door, carrying his cane even indoors. Stopped going into the drawing room at night. Why? She looked at the carpet. He said he heard breathing in there when he was alone. I glanced at Poirot, remained silent. She added, and one morning he told me he'd found the chair, turned again, the one by the wall. He said he hadn't moved it, that no one could have moved it. He seemed, her voice wavered, truly afraid, but nodded, and yet he did not dismiss. The servants know, he said, if it was someone in the house, he'd rather keep them close. Did he accuse anyone? She hesitated. Not directly, but I think he suspected Edwin. Why? Because Edwin had asked him for money, a large amount. Uncle refused. They argued loudly. Edwin called him a relic of rotting world. Uncle didn't forgive that sort of thing. Poirot tapped her finger on the edge off the piano. You are very honest, mademoiselle. Judith's eyes narrowed. I want the truth no matter where it points. Poirot nodded once, as do I. As we left, I whispered, do you believe her? Keogh tilted his head. She told us what she wanted us to talk now, but she did not mention the chair's past or the letter. What do you think happened in that room, Poirot? He paused in the hall, listening to the creaks and hush of the house. I do not yet know, mon ami, but I suspect the past is sitting in that chair, turned to the wall. Yes, but watching. Chapter. For the letter that was never meant to be found, rain had turned to mist by the afternoon, coating Greystone Hollow. In a pale sheen that blurred outlines and dimmed corners, the house seemed to hunch beneath the sky. Its roof sagging slightly under the weight of unspoken things inside. The air had grown tense and brittle, as if the murder had reset some invisible clock, and now every tick counted down to something darker. Poole spent the early hours pacing to Stevie, pausing now and then to gaze at the chair facing the wall. "Why does one turn a chair away, Hastings, eh?" he asked without looking at me. To ignore something, I offered. Or maybe to avoid being seen. Poirot turned. "No, it is not only to escape the world. Sometimes it is a kenned-off punishment, an exile, a seat reserved for memory or guilt." Across the room, examining the skirting boards, the fireplace, the lines on the rug, I watched him lift the corner of a faded Persian carpet and stoop to touch the floor beneath. Beneath the carpet, embedded neatly into the wooden floorboards, was a small brass disc. It was no larger than a half-crown, but its presence there, unnoticed, unremarked, seemed suddenly important. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew the brass key we had found in the hidden drawer of the library. It matched the color of the disc. He turned it a click. A section of floor shifted slightly. Not a trapdoor exactly, but a shallow recess inside. A small oilskin-wrapped envelope sat like a relic. Poole retrieved it and examined the front. There was no name, no date, only the faint imprint of a woman's initials, M.D. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, brittle with age and watermarked with the crest of a private wartime hospital. The handwriting was neat, but hurried. Ace, though, written between tasks. "Hugo, I heard from the matron. She suspects. She says the chair is cursed. And perhaps she's right, but what we did, we had no choice. We agreed to silence, because the alternative was ruin. But I think someone knows that soldier who screamed when he sat in it, eh? Do you remember the way he looked at us? If he tells anyone, it's over. You promised me no one else would ever sit in that chair again. You promised. And yet, feel its presence even now, like it waits. Please destroy this. If they find it, we're both done." I read it aloud twice, then lowered the letter slowly. "Good Lord," I whispered, "waiting God's name happened in this house." Poole said nothing for a long time. His gaze lingered on the chair again, its back to the room, its face to the wall. Then he carefully rewrapped the letter and placed it in his breast pocket. "This house," he said, "quietly remembers more than it reveals." Return to the library, where Inspector Cray was interviewing Claudia Drex, sat stiffly, legs crossed at the ankles, hands folded in her lap, as if waiting a schoolmaster's scolding. "I never liked this house," she said. "It's too quiet. Things don't feel right here." "With things?" Craig asked. Claudia hesitated. "Think I'm mad, but the night before last, I went into the drawing room around midnight to fetch a shawl. I washed her. I left it on the sofa." She paused. Poole stepped in gently, and the room was dark. "But, Kay, I could see someone sitting in the chair. That chair that Annie against." "The wall? The one facing the wall?" Cray asked. "Yes, but it was turned toward fire. I saw the back of her head, just sitting there still. I didn't cyanide. I left immediately." Cragg frowned. "Did you tell anyone?" "No." "Thought it must have been Uncle Hugo." Poirot leaned in. "Did it look like him?" She looked at him, eyes trembling. "That's just it. I don't know. I couldn't be sure, but Wover." "It was they didn't move." Craig sighed. "So, to recap your husband's claims, to remember nothing, you saw someone sitting silently in a turn chair, the dead of night, and no one knows how Sir Hugo ended up strangled." Claudia flushed. "I told you what I saw, believe it or not." Rowe remained polite. "Mercy, madame. You have given us much to think about." After she left, Cray slumped into the chair behind the desk. "I've had easier cases," he muttered. "Most of that time, someone slips up a lie, a footprint, a weapon. But here, it's all suggestion and shadows." Poole smiled faintly. "Murder, Spectre, is not always crude metaphysic. is as elegant as a forgotten note beneath the floorboard. Craig glanced at him. You found something. I found a memory, said Poirot cryptically, but it is not yet clear whose. We joined the family for a grim supper. In the dining room, conversation was many malforks clicked against plates, like tiny clocks. Judith looked up suddenly. Uncle Hugo said once about the chair that it had listened to too much. Do you suppose Hammond, something by that Gilbert, pale and unusually quiet, offered a nervouscal, perhaps? He just didn't like furniture with opinions. Judith glared at him. Poirot sipped his wine. There are objects, he said, that record without writing, walls that remember chairs, that witness. We do not often listen to them, but perhaps we should. His words sank into the room like fog. That night, as we prepared for bed, I stood at the window, watching the rain reader. Poirot was at the writing desk, studying the letter. Once more, Hastings, he said quietly. You remember the initials on the first note? F. I said just that. And now, Wehave MD, the nurse, the letter writer. He tapped his finger. There are two women in this story. We do not know, one who feared a chair and one who signed a warning with a single letter. Do you think the murderer is a woman, Poirot? I think, he said slowly, the murderer is not alone. I turned toward him. He looked up. Eyes, Harper, than they've been all day. One person may strangle a man, but it takes a history, a truth shared, to create a silence this deep. And with that, he extinguished the lamp. Chapter 5. The man who washed himself the following morning began with frost, not the kind that sparkled cheerfully in the sun, but the dull, hard crust of ice that coats windows like a film of dread. It suited Greystone Hollow. The manor looked especially grim beneath it, crouching in its own shadow, as though reluctant to rise with the day inside. Fireplaces had been lit, but the warmth failed to reach the corners. Bew rose early, dressed meticulously, and proceeded straight to the drawing room of the chair. He said nothing as he entered. He simply stood, staring at the chair, as if it might blink. It has not moved, I said somewhat uselessly. Not visibly, Poirot murmured, but perhaps it has said something overnight. I almost laughed until he stepped forward, crouched beside the leg of the chair, and brushed his fingertip across the wood dust sea on three legs. But not forth. It was moved slightly, just enough to tilt. He stood quite set his feet. He stared. But who would come in here at night after the murder? Mean, who wanted to confirm something, or someone compelled to return. Haas. We remember Claudia's account. Yes, the figure in the chair. Poole turned toward Mesh, described the chair as facing the fire, and now it faces the wall again. I nodded. It always returns, as though something insists on it. At that moment, a voice echoed from the far hall. All. Poole. It was Edwin Drake, bounding in with his usual arrogance, barely dented by the murder of his unclebitum. Kira says, you're still poking around like some kind of antique vacuum, hoovering up ghost stories. Let the police handle it, will you? Kua remained. .com. I shall take that as a compliment, monsieur, though I prefer to think of myself as an archaeologist of truth. Edwin scoffed. Truth? This house is riddled with lies, always has been. Then you admit there are lies? I asked. Heg of me a scornful glance. Don't twist my words, Captain. Everyone lies here, my Durkison. Judith, the devoted niece, Claudia, with her tragic little whispers. Even Uncle Hugo lied all his life. Pooh stepped closer. And you, monsieur? Do you lie? Edwin Dodden flinch when it suits me. Barrow smiled faintly. Mercy, your honesty is revealing. As Edwin turned to leave, Poirot called after him. You said once to Sir Hugo, Tave was a relic of a rotting world. Do you still believe Tated? One's jaw tightened. Yes, and that world died a long time ago. Only the house did a date notice after he was gone. Poirot turned to me. That man is angry, but not frightened. Not yet. We were summoned shortly after the vestity, where Inspector Cray stood holding a folded document. Thought you should see this. He said it was found this morning in Sir Hugo's bedroom, tucked into a book of military poetry, was a draft of a new will pool. Read it silently. His eyes, narrowing as Stings observed the beneficiaries. The list was short: Judith primary heir Claudia, a small stipend. Gilbert, nothing. Edwin, nothing. Instead, a line had been drawn through his name. The will is unsigned Cray, noted but dated only 2 days before the murder pool exhaled. S.O. Motive emerges like a hand from water. Cray frowned. You think Edwin did it? You think? Edwin had a reason that is not the same as guilt. Judith entered then, unbidden. I heard, she said softly, about the will. I didn't know. He never told me. Pooh nodded. Were you aware that Sir Hugo had been corresponding with a woman named M, possibly a nurse from his wartime days? Judith froze. No, he studied her carefully, and yet the initials appeared twice, once seen, a hidden drawer, and once beneath the floorboards. Judith's voice was steady. He never spoke of that time the war changed him. He'd never remarried after. Aunt Dora Pass said he'd used up all his loyalty in one war, or the other. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You speak as though he had betrayed. One, she hesitated. I think he regretted something, but I never. Skiddy was afraid of what he might say. As she left, Poirot murmured, that is twice today we have heard of fear. Hastings, but not the fear of guilt, the fear of knowledge. Later that afternoon, we were given access to Sir Hugo's personnel files. Lane brought them to us in 2 wooden boxes, locked but easily opened with the brass key. Inside were files of letters, clippings, and receipts, but one folder labeled simply 1917 contained photographs. Some were of soldiers, smiling, standing in front of canvas tents. Others, more disturbing, the aftermath of what appeared to be a psychological ward, men with haunted expressions. Notes attached to their coats. Poole studied one photograph for a long time. It was a patient, seated, but not facing the camera. Instead, his back was turned, and he was seated in a chair. The Samuel, unmistakably, the one that now faced the wall at Greystone Hollow. Poirot turned over the photograph on the back, written in faded pencil. Sat there until they carried him out. Said it, watched him think. Said it made him confess his things. He never said out loud. I felt a chill. Pooh tapped the fauteuil. Man sits in a chair and speaks only to the wall. And now Sir Hugo is dead and the chair has returned. But I ask you, Hastings, who brought it back? Chapter 6. The visitor who was never invited. Visitor arrived at dusk, as though summoned by the past. A motorcar crunched along the gravel drive, just as Poirot and I returned from a short walk around estate grounds. The sky was the color of weak tea, and Greystone Hollow loomed behind us like a gray sentinel awaiting judgment. The arrival was unexpected. Lane had not announced it. No telegram had preceded it, and yet the guest tipped from the car as if he had always belonged to the narrative. She was a woman, tall, thin, with a face lined by years but composed with striking pressure. Her coat was military and cut dark green with polished buttons. A hat obscured most of her silver hair, but what drew my attention first were her gloves, black, pristine, tight-fitting, and the small silver medallion she wore on and chain around her throat. Who, ever attuned to details, was already halfway down the steps. To meet her, madame, he said, bowing slightly. You arrive at an interesting hour. The woman smiled thinly. I often do. Lane emerged a moment later, startled, and paused before hurrying to her side. Miss Moore, daring, forgive me. I wasn't informed. I didn't write ahead, she said. Simply, I didn't want to be expected. Pooh froze for the smallest second. Daring, repeated softly. She met his eyes. Yes, Maud Daring. Hugo's nurse from the war. He glanced at Pooh. He did not blink. Then perhaps, madame, it is time we talked. Miss Daring was shown into the blue parlor, where she declined tea, declined whiskey, and declined the offer to sit. I had been summoned here in spirit for years, she said. So I thought. I'd answer. At last Poirot was calm, hands clasped before him. He wrote to Sir Hugo twice. She nodded. More than that actually, but only 2 letters. I imagine Savage warned him about the chair. More daring, gave a thin, mirthless smile. It was never a booth. Chair. It was about what the chair witnessed Hastings say nothing. Listen carefully now. I worked in an officer's convalescence ward during the spring of 1917. She continued. Hugo was stationed nearby. He came often to play cards, tazit, with the broken men. To speak to one in particular. Poirot stepped forward slightly. A soldier. She nodded. A man named Thomas Eldridge, Captain 27. He came back from the front, not wounded, but broken in a different way. Hallucinations, obsession with objects. He refused to sleep unless he was seated in a chair facing a blank wall. Said, if you didn't see the wrong things. Poirot's voice was soft and curious, always curious. He believed Eldridge had seen some thing horrible. He thought talking to him would help, but it didn't. Hugo became obsessed with the chair. Said it was a mirror for the mindset. It made men say things they hadn't even told themselves. What did Eldridge say? I asked. She glanced at me. Then he said Hugo was part of it. That whatever it was, Hugo had agreed to it. Poirot spoke gently, and then her. Died Thomas Eldridge. Died not in the war. In the war, dear Schwazna thought. Cherpew's face was unreadable, and the chair were ordered to burn it. But Hugo bribed the transport crew. He had it sent to Greystone Hollow. She lowered her voice. I begged him. Nato. I wrote him letters. I told him it wasn't the same chair anymore, that he thought something. Pooh nodded slowly, and now he is dead. Her eyes sharpened. I know. Where were you, Mr. Daring, the night before last? She didn't flinch. On a train from Edinburgh. I arrived here just now. Lane can confirm. Poirot turned to Lane, who nodded reluctantly. She's telling the truth. The journey, ice long. No one could have faked it. I asked the obvious. Then why come at all? Because he's dead, she said simply. And that means whatever was watching from that chair is still watching, and someone other than Hugo may have heard it whisper. Shattered too. Poor, I came to warn you that evening. Poor sat in the music room alone with the letter from 1919 and the photo of the faceless man in the chair. The household had grown more withdrawn. Gilbert drank too much. Edwin stormed about, muttering about property lawyers. Claudia sat in windows like a ghost. Judith watched everything and said nothing. Poirot finally called me over the ear. Is a pattern, Hastings, he said, but it is subtle. The murderer did not act from rage or convenience. They acted with time, with memory, with knowledge. He held up the letter. This was never meant to be found, but someone found it recently. Same. Who knew the chair's history? Someone who perhaps sat in it themselves. Just to see. I felt a chill. You think the killer wanted to know what? Hugo knew. Pooh's voice was low, or wanted Hugo to remember what he'd forgotten. And then from it the room fell silent. I asked carefully, do you believe in supernatural things, Poirot? He smiled faintly. No, Hastings, but I believe in guilt. I believe in psychology, and I believe a man can die from something he finally remembers. He stood. Tomorrow we speak to everyone again with new eyes, because now, my friend, we're not merely solving a murder. He turned toward the chair. We Aaron bearing a confession. Chapter 7. The Confession. Written insolence. By the time morning broke, the air inside Greystone Hollow had changed. Their rooms felt tense, not with grief, but with anticipation, as though the house itself knew. Poirot was closing, and Judith was nowhere to be seen at breakfast. Edwin remained locked in the billiards room, nursing his bitterness. Claudia sat, staring at her untouched. Teaglebert fumbled through his eggs, as though they might whisper secrets. Lane moved between them all, like a ghost, silent, efficient. Always just out of reach. Pooh, however, was radiant. They moved with precision, inspecting the silverware, the tablecloth, the hollow crease in Sir Hugo's empty seat. Then, without preamble, he tapped the spoon side. Claudia's hand, madame, he said softly. Did you write letters to your uncle in the last few weeks? She blinked. Startled, no, why would I? He tilted his head. And yet, Sir Hugo kept envelopes addressed to you. Empty, sealed. Her eyes widened. What? Cruel. Lend closer. Empty letters are sent for one of two reasons. As decorous, as signals. Gilbert sputtered. This is absurd. Hugo was half mad near the endure, trying to turn scribbles and furniture into murder. Pooh did not respond to him. Instead, he stepped back from the table. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, the time has come. Each of you will follow me, one by one, to the drawing room. We shall sit in the chair, we shall face the wall, and we shall think to him. Laughed from the door. What are we taking turns confessing like schoolboys? Pooh smiled faintly. May we miss you? That is exactly what we shall do. First Gilbert. He entered the drawing room, nervously shuffling, as though the wall had grown taller since breakfast. Pooh gestured to the chair. Sit, Gilbert. Oh, be at the chair creaked. He glanced around the room. Now, said Poirot, you will close your eyes. Say nothing. Just think. Gilbert shifted. This is ridiculous. Do it. His side closed his eyes for a full minute. There was silence. Pooh watched. I watched. Even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath. Gilbert opened his eyes. At last, pale. I heard nothing. Did you, Ali? Poirot, sagely. Or did you remember something you did not want to? Gilbert stood quickly and left without speaking. Next, Claudia. She stepped carefully to the chair and sat with a stillness that unnerved even. She closed her eyes without instruction. After a few seconds, she shivered. I remember, she whispered, when I first came to the house, Sir Hugo asked me to promise never to move that chair. He said it had a memory, that it remembered things even he had tried to forget. Poor did not interrupt. She continued, voice shaking. I thought he was eccentric, but now, when I sit here, it feels like someone is behind me, watching, not angry, just waiting. Poirot nodded. Mercy. Madame Claudia stood slowly and left the room, avoiding her eyes. Then Edwin, he swaggered and flopped into the chair and crossed his legs. Why should I chant, speak in tongues? Poirot smiled. Just sit and listen. Teaser. Edwin's smirk twitched. He closed his eyes. 15 seconds passed. Then she deserted. Toe. Die, he muttered. Poirot stepped forward. Who? Edwin snapped it. Wake. What? I didn't say anything. You did, I said clearly. He looked rattled. You tricked me. Poirot's gaze was sharp. Norm, you tricked yourself, Edwin stormed out without another word. Finally, Judith, she turned with grace, but wore an expression that said she already knew what was coming. She sat in the chair, Usto, in word, thrown facing the wall in silence. Poole said nothing for nearly 2 minutes. Quietly, you know who MD is? Judith closed her eyes. Maud daring. She wrote to your uncle about the chair, about something that happened in 1917. She told me last night, Judith said after you questioned her. Pooh nodded. And yet you did not come to Medjugorje. Turned slowly to face him, because I didn't think it mattered anymore. Hugo was already dead. Pooh studied her. And do you know why who was killed? Her lips parted slightly, then closed. Yes, she whispered, because I remembered. Poirot's voice dropped. Who helped him remember, mademoiselle? Judith stood. You'll find out. That's what you do. She walked out before he could reply. When the room was empty, Poirot sat in asterisk. The chair himself stared. What are you doing? He smiled, listening. To what? He didn't answer for 10 minutes. He sat in silence, hands folded, eyes closed. At last, he rose and faced me. Hastings, he said softly. Ichno, who killed Sir Hugo. My breath caught. Then, why wait? Because one more person must sit in the chair. He pointed not to Edwin, not to Claudia, not to Gilbert or Judith. He pointed to Lina Hector 8. The butler, who knew too much. The drawing room was colder than usual. One Lane entered, his face unreadable, but his eyes betraying a flicker of funnies. The household watched from the doorways and corridors, each person holding their breath, waiting to see what the butler might. Lane's footsteps were measured as he approached the chair, the same one that had become a silent witness to secrets. Long-buried Poirot gestured for him to sit, but the butler paused, glancing toward the assembled household. He have served his family for many years. Lane began, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable weight. And I have seen more than I ought to, not because I sought knowledge, but because sometimes the walls themselves. Whisper sat in the chair, his posture erect, the chair creaking softly under him. Heck closed his eyes, and a hush fell across the room. After several long moments, Laney opened his eyes slowly. There are truths, he said softly, that a man keeps hidden even from himself. So Hugo was a man haunted by such a truth. Poirot leaned forward, attentive. Lane continued. Years ago, during the war, there was an incident, something unspeakable, sir. Hugo and a nurse, more daring, were involved. Something that led to the death of a soldier named Thomas Eldridge. It was kept secret, but the memory lingered like a shadow across the house. Looked directly at Poirot. The chair was a reminder, a punishment. A cabal, left, sitting in it, forced the past to confront him. And the past was not Kent. Poirot's eyes narrowed, so Hugo feared that someone else in the house knew this secret, that they might use it against him. Lane paused, gathering his house. I never imagined it would come to murder. Poirot stood, his expression grave. Thank you, Lane. Your honesty may save this house from further tragedy. As Lane left the room, Poirot turned to the others. The butler has revealed the core of the mystery. The chair, the past, the silence, all connected. He looked at me, but one question remains. Who among you chose to act upon this secret? Room remained silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. Prue's gaze swept over them. We will find out. Chapter 9. Gathering of shadows. That evening, the atmosphere in Greystone Hollow had thickened, as if the house itself were drawing its curtains tighter against an encroaching darkness. The servants moved silently, the flicker of candlelight casting long, restless shadows along the oak-paneled walls. The family, once scattered and defensive, had been summoned to the drawing room and arena. Poised for confrontation, Pua stood before them, calm and commanding, his hands folded in front, as though presenting a case, and Corth's gaze swept over each face. Some masks of stoic resolve, others thinly veiled d'anxiety. Madame Jour, he began, voice steady. That time has come to shed the shadows that have so long concealed the truth. Each a few harbors secrets, but one holds the final piece. The truth that turned fear into murder. He paused, allowing his words to settle like dust. Seer Hugo Drake was not merely a man burdened by his past. He was a man hunted by the chair. This cursed relic was both his punishment and his tormentor. But the question remains, who struck the fatal blow? Judith's eyes gleamed with a fiery light. You speak as though the murderer is one of us, but why would anyone here want to kill my uncle? He was a stern man, yes, but hardly. Cruel Poirot's smile was slight, but there was still beneath it. Madame, families where money and legacy intertwine, cruelty often wears the mask of duty. Edwin shifted impatiently enough. Riddles, let us speak plain. Lepoux inclined his head. Very well, consider this the letters from Miss Daring Daenerys, the hidden will. Chair that faced the wall as if hiding from its own past. These are not mere coincidences. He fixed his gaze on Gilbert Drake. Your alibi was shaky last night. You claimed to be in your room, yet witnesses heard you pacing the hall near the study. Gilbert flushed, stammering, I was restless. I couldn't sleep. Pua turned to Claudia. Madame, your vision of A figure in the chair, facing the fire. Was it a trick of the light, or something more? Claudia's lips trembled. I saw what I saw. I don't know. What it means. Lane, standing quietly near the door, observed them all with a knowing glance. Buell lifted a hand to silence the murmurs. But it is not only what we see, but what do not say. Secrets fester in silence. In silence, Kills gestured toward the chair. Tomorrow, we will meet again. Tonight, I urge you to reflect. The walls have ears, and the chair has memories. Whoever committed this crime will find their conscience unrelenting. As the family dispersed, I caught Judith's eye. There's more beneath the surface, she whispered. I can feel it. Poirot nodded. Indeed, Hastings, the gathering of shadows is often the prelude to dawn. Chapter 10. The secret revealed. The dawn broke cold and gray over Greystone Hollow, casting long, somber shadows through the manor's narrow windows. The household gathered once more in the drawing room, the air thick with tension and the unspoken weight of expectations. This was the moment. Poirot had long been preparing for the unraveling of the mystery that had haunted the estate. Poirot stood before them, his small frame poised, like a general ready to deliver his final command. His keen eyes swept across each face, weary, anxious, some steeled with resolve, others cracked with fear. Madame, Monsieur, he began, we have uncovered many truths and faced many silences, but now, at last, it is time to confront the secret that has festered in this house for decades. Paused, allowing his words to sink in the chair which Sir Hugo strokes so Faraday. Not merely a piece of furniture, it is a symbol, a witness to a crime long buried. Turning to Lane, Poirot nodded. You have served this house loyally for many years and have borne witness to its secrets. Lane inclined his head solemnly. Poirot continued. And you, Monsieur, hold the key, but both literally and figuratively, to the truth. He pulled from his pocket the brass key found beneath the floorboards and the letter from Maud Daring. This letter, Poirot said, reveals the darkest moment in this house's history. Death of Thomas Eldridge, a soldier, broken not by bullets, but by the horrors that followed him home. Poirot addressed the family. Sir Hugo was burdened by guilt and fear, guilt for what transpired, and feared that the past would return to claim him. Judith's hands clenched tightly. But the question remains, Poirot said, his voice rising with quiet authority. Who among you allowed this secret to come? A weapon who murdered Sir Hugo to keep the past buried. He stepped forward, eyes locking with Edwin Drake. You had every reason to resent your uncle, a disinherited heir, bitter and angry, yet it was not mere resentment that drove AO to act. You believed your uncle would reveal something that would destroy the family name. Edwin's face palled, but he remained silent. Pooh turned to Judith. And you, Judith, you sought to protect your uncle's legacy, but feared the revelations would shatter your carefully constructed world. Judith's breath caught Poirot's gaze, shifted to Claudia. Claudia, you saw what others denied. The figure in the chair, the shadow of the past. Your silence was complicity, born of fear. Claudia nodded, tears glistening. Wero finally looked at Gilbert. And you, Gilbert, too afraid to confront the truth, sought refuge in drink. He paused, but the true murderer is neither bitter heir nor frightened spouse. All eyes turned to Lane. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Lane, the loyal butler, protector of secrets. You knew the truth all along. You carried the burden of silence, but you could not carry the burden of guilt. Lane stepped forward, face resigned. It was me, he confessed, quietly. I strangled Sir Hugo to protect the family, to protect the secret, but I did not intend to kill it. It was a moment of madness. Pooh nodded. Your silence became deadly. But no, justice will be served as the weight of confession settled. The house seemed to exhale, the chair facing the wall once more, as if the past could finally rest. Chapter 11. The quiet aftermath confession hung in the air like a heavy fog, settling slowly over. Gray stone hollow lane's pale face, marked by years of silent service. And now, the burden of guilt seemed smaller somehow. Beneath the high ceilings of the drawing room, the family remained stunned, their complex web of suspicion and fear unraveling with a fragile finality. Poor, ever composed, spoke quietly, yet with undeniable authority. Justice, Asami, is not simply about punishment. It is about truth, reconciliation, and peace. Judith sat, her hands, trembling eyes reflecting the years of secrets and shadows. She had borne Edwin's usual arrogance, was gone, replaced by a dull remorse that even his pride could not conceal. Claudia's tear-shed long accents dried, leaving behind a brittle stoicism, while Gilbert leaned heavily against the mantelpiece as if the weight of revelation might crush him. Lane, escorted gently by Inspector Cray, was quiet, accepting his fate without resistance. I watched Poirot closely as he turned away from the gathering. Mon ami, I said softly, how does one find peace in a house haunted by so much? He looked out the window toward the fading light. The peace comes when the ghosts are faced. Hastings, when the chair that faced the wall finally turns toward light. The house, for the first time since our arrival, felt lighter, the dew air less oppressive, the silence less accusing outside. The rain had stopped, the sun peeked shilly through the clouds, scattering golden flecks upon the stone. Wakadebo smiled faintly. It is not always the loudest voices that reveal the greatest truths, nor the darkest nights that conceal the deepest sequituminis. It is the quiet after the storm where justice is found. I nodded. Greystone Hollow will never forget, he added, but it may now begin to heal. And with that the house seemed to sigh, a slow, measured breath, as if releasing its last held secret. Chapter 12. Shadows that linger. Ravon as Lane was led away, and the household tried to resume some semblance of normality. I could feel a persistent weight in the air. Greystone Hollow had been unburdened of its darkest secret yet. The shadows it cast remained long entangled. That evening, Poirot and I sat once more in the study, the flickering candlelight dancing over the walls lined with ancient books and faded photographs. Poirot was unusually quiet, his gaze distant, as he toyed with a silver cigarette case. Hastings, he began softly, the murder is solved, but the mystery is not yet completed. Looked up, intrigued. The chair, the letters, the past, all spoke of a torment deeper than mere guilt or fear. They spoke of a secret that did not die. Would Sir Hugo or Thomas Eldridge? Poirot leaned forward, eyes sharply. Fear, there are still truths hidden beneath the surface, like roots of a tree growing beneath the soil, unseen but powerful. Asked, do you think someone else knows? Nor, or perhaps another secret has yet to surface? Nodded. Precisely. The past often leaves echoes, Hastings, shadows that linger long after the final act. Our conversation was interrupted by Aesop. Knock. Lane, before his departure, had left a note delivered by the ever-watchful butler. Poirot opened it carefully. The message was brief. Looked to the nurse. There is more than you see. I frowned. The nurse, Miss Daring-Poo, nodded. Her arrival was no coincidence. Excuse, she is the keeper of more than one secret. We must speak with her again. As the night deepened, he could not shake the feeling that Greystone Hollow still held its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Chapter 13. Secrets beneath the surface. Morning fog clung stubbornly to the grounds of Greystone Hollow, blurring the edges of the familiar and turning the estate into a landscape of whispers and shadows. Even the sun, reluctant to pierce the thick veil of moisture, cast a diffuse light through the ancient oaks and weeping willows. It was a fitting backdrop for the next stage of our investigation, one that promised to peel back the layers of silence surrounding the mysterious Miss Morad Daring. After reading the enigmatic note left by Lane, Poirot insisted that we revisit the nurse. It was clear to him that Ald's presence at the estate was not incidental, but intricately woven into the fabric of this grim tale. With an air of quiet determination, we set out to find her before the day grew old, miss. Daring was in the small sitting room at the east wing, a sparse chamber with faded wallpaper and a faint scent of lavender and old books. She greeted us with the same composed demeanor as before, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of a burden. "Cried silently for too long, Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings." She sat inclining her head gracefully. "I feared you would come." King Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "Madame, you arrived here to warn us yet. Convinced that you hold more than warnings in your heart. You carry a story waiting to be told." Maud sighed, the weight of years pressing visibly upon her. "Very well, you deserve to know, but once revealed, there is no turning back." Settled into the threadbare chairs, the quiet punctuated only by the distant caw of a lone crow and the faint ticking of an ancient clock. During the war, she began slowly. "I was assigned to a military hospital near Thurston Front. Among the many men I cared for was Thomas Eldridge, a captain strong in spirit, but shattered by the horrors he had witnessed. He was plagued, not by physical wounds, but by a torment, unseen hallucinations, symptom, and an obsession with a particular chair." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "That chair was set to face the wall, to block out the world, but Eldridge claimed it did something else. It forced the mind to confront truths buried too deep." He spoke of confessions, whispered to the empty room scraps, made flesh by silence. Poirot leaned forward, and Sir Hugo Arusa's darkened Hugo was there too. He believed the chair held a power, not supernatural, but psychological, a place where the mind's prisoners could be unlocked. He was obsessed. Hastings, obsessed with uncovering the past and making it speak. I asked gently, "What past, madam? What secret did the chair hold?" Her voice dropped. "The death of a man named Eldridge was not natural. There was more to it than the official reports said. A scandal, a cover-up, sir. Hugo and E were involved in decisions that condemned a soldier's sanity and perhaps his life." She looked directly at Poirot. "I wrote to warn him, to beg him to Levethi. Past buried, but he could not." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And yet that past returned with a vengeance." Emerald nodded. "Because some secrets do not die. They wait for the right moment, their right person to near them." The room grew silent as her words settled. Then she added quietly, "There was one more truth, one that Sir Hugo never spoke of, a betrayal, not by a stranger, but by someone trusted." I looked at Poirot, who was staring intently as though piecing together a hidden puzzle. Hope betrayed him. I asked. Mort hesitated, then whispered, "That is what I am afraid of. Say, because the truth is more terrible than you thinks." Stood abruptly. "I must rest now. You will find the answers you seek, but they will not bring peace." As she left the room, Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, the heart of this mystery beats in shadowed places, but every shadow is cast by light. That light is about to shine." Outside, the fog had begun to lift, but air remained heavy with unspoken fears. Greystone Hollow was far from silent, and these secrets, buried beneath its stones, were stirring, ready to emerge a captor. 14. The web unravels. The day that followed Maud Daring's revelation was unlike any other we had experienced. At Greystone Hollow, the estate, once a backdrop of quiet menace, now seemed to pulse with restless energy, attention vibrating in every whispered conversation and every guarded glance. Poirot and I began our day with renewed purpose. After a brief breakfast, we retired to the library, a sanctuary of Agatha-bound volumes and delicate manuscripts. Here Poirot intended to piece together the fragments we had gathered so far, weaving them into a tapestry. Revia Lingua had betrayed Sir Hugo, and why sat at the large oak desk, spreading out letters, photographs, and a will before him with careful precision. I took a seat nearby, watching his nimble fingers dance over the evidence. The letter from Maud Daring. Poirot murmured, speaks of betrayal, but to understand the heart of that betrayal, we must look to the familiar secrets, those they guard not even from themselves. I nodded. You suspect one-off's household is hiding more than they admit, precisely a betrayal from Whitney's, the most painful and often the most deadlier moment of reflection was interrupted by the soft knock of Lane at the door. He entered, carrying a bundle of papers and a small box wrapped in faded cloth. Sir, I found these among Sir Hugo's personal effects, Lane said, setting them gently on the desk. Poirot unfolded the papers carefully. They were financial ledgers, detailing a series of transactions between Sir Hugo and an unknown individual, large sums of money disguised as investments, but with no clear source or purpose. He then opened the box, revealing a collection of photographs, candid, private moments captured over years. Among them was one that caught my eye: Sir Hugo and Edwin standing close in a garden, smiling but with an edge of tension beneath their smiles. Poirot studied it thoughtfully. Complicated relationship, yes, Lane nodded. There were disputes, sir, about money, about inheritance. Poirot tapped a finger on the ledger. Money can bind families, or it can tear them apart. We spent the morning reviewing the documents, each page revealing subtle contradictions and hidden tensions. Later, Poirot summoned the family for a private meeting in the drawing room. The mood was heavy, the tension palpable. Each person took their place. Poirot began calmly. We have uncovered financial dealings that suggest Sir Hugo's concerns extended beyond the chair and its haunting memories. There are debts and secrets that may have contributed to his demise. He turned to Edwin. You were cut from the will recently? Yes. Edwin's face hardened. Yes, for reasons I have not been told. Poole smiled thinly. I believe you know more than you admit. Okay, Judith interjected, voice sharp enough. We're not here to air dirty laundry. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mademoiselle. The truth often resides in what it is unsaid. He turned to Claudia. Madame, your sightings in the drawing room were you aware of financial disputes? Claudia hesitated. I knew only the tensions had risen, but money was not my concern. Gilbert shifted uncomfortably. I didn't want to be involved. Poirot's gaze was steady. Yet, involvement finds usual mesure. He then addressed the household as a whole. The web that entangles Greystone Hollow is one of betrayal, fear, and desperation too. Chair was but a symbol, a focus for long-held grievances and secrets. Poirot paused. But there's one final strand, the one that will unravel the entire mystery. He looked directly at Lane. You have served this family loyally. Lane, yet Yuckery, your own burden. Tell us, what did you know of the past betrayals, and what did you do to protect them? Lane's eyes met Poirot's steady but resolute. Protected the family as I swore, but when the past threatened to destroy you, Sal, I acted, not out of malice, but out of desperation. The room held its breath. Poirot, not Datton, tell us everything. And as Lane began to speak, the house seemed to lean in, eager to finally hear the truth buried beneath the shadow. Chapter 15. The confession of the loyal servant. The drawing room was hushed, the heavy silence broken only by the measured voice of Lane as he began his confession. The household sat rigid, every ear straining to catch the details of the tale he was about to unfold. I have observed the Drake family for over 2 decades, Lane began, and in that time, he have witnessed loyalty and treachery, love and resentment. There is one secret I kept, not out of cowardice, but from a sense of duty. Half-housed, glancing briefly at each member of the family during the war years, Sir Hugo and I were involved in a decision that changed the course of many lives. A young soldier, Thomas Eldridge, was suffering not just from wounds of war, but from the torment of his mind. Sir Hugo, the nurse more daring, and I knew the danger he posed to himself. And Dothis Lane's voice grew quieter. Almost Reverend there was a plan. To keep Eldridge confined, to protect him from himself and to protect the others from him. But things went terribly. Ron Gildridge's death was not accidental, but a result of that plan, Poirot's gazelles. Steady. You admit then that you and Sir Hugo were? Complicit? Lane nodded solemnly. We believed it was necessary, but the guilt weighed heavily. Sir Hugo, he kept the chair, the one Eldridge sat in, as a reminder of what had been done. He turned toward Judith. Your uncle was a man tormented by his past, but he sought to keep the secret safe, even from those closest to him. Interjected gently, and yet the secret became a weapon, a burden too. Heavy for all man. Lane swallowed hard. Yes, and when Sir Hugo began to unravel, I feared for the family's safety. That is why I confronted them that night. As Shu's voice cracked slightly, I never intended to kill it. Was meant to be a warning, a desperate attempt to silence his torment before it destroyed. All the room was deathly still. Jet's eyes glistened with tears. Why didn't you come forward? 'Cause I was loyal, Lane whispered. Because I believed I was protecting that family. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Loyalty is a powerful motive, but it can lend the heart. Spectre Cray stepped forward. Lane, your confession changes much, but there remain questions about the involvement. Oh, Feathers. Lane looked up resolute. I acted alone. The others are innocent of this crime. Poirot smiled gently, perhaps, but innocence does not absolve one from the of secrets and lies that bound this household. Turn to us. This chapter closes Hastings, but the story of Greystone Hollow will linger in whispers for years to come. As Lane was escorted away, the family seemed to exhale collectively, relief, sorrow, and the heavy cost. After through all mingling in the air, outside the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, promising a new day, and with it the possibility of healing. High. Chapter 16. Echoes of the past days that followed Lane's confession were steeped in a strange, still Greystone Hollow, once alive with quiet tension and the murmur of secrets, now seemed suspended in a contemplative hush. It was as if the very stones of the estate were absorbing the truth and allowing the house itself to breathe forth. First time in years, Poole and spent the mornings walking the grounds, the crisp autumn air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. In distant woods, the gardens, though unkempt in place, bore the careful imprint of years of care, a contrast to the turmoil that had played out within the manor's walls. Monama, Poirot said one morning, as we paused beneath a withered oak. Greystone Hollows, like the mind of a troubled man, beautiful, complex, but shadowed by memories that refused to fade. I nodded, and like a troubled mind, it needs to meadow heal. He smiled faintly. Indeed, but healing is not merely forgetting, it is confronting the past and making peace with it. Back inside, Poirot revisited the scattered documents and photographs that had become our companions throughout the investigation, carefully arranged them on the library table, pausing over a faded portrait of Sir Hugo and more daring there, faces etched with the gravity of unspoken promises. There is a symmetry here. Hastings Poole mused to lives intertwined by duty, burdened by secrets, and timidly shattered by the weight of those secrecy. Looked at the portrait and then at Poirot. Do you think Maud will find peace now that the truth is out? P's eyes were thoughtful. Perhaps. Truth is a double-edged sword. Its wounds, but also heals later. That day we gathered with the remaining family members in the drawing room. The atmosphere was subdued, buttoned with a tentative hope. Judith, now more composed, spoke quietly about her uncle's legacy and the need to move forward. There is much to forgive, she said, and much to rebuild, but I believe this house can be a place of peace once more. Poirot nodded approvingly. It will take time, but the foundation of peace is always truth. As evening fell, Poirot and I sat by the hearth, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. Hastings, Poirot said softly, this case has reminded me that the human heart is the most mysterious of all puzzles. We seek logic and order, but it is emotion and memory that often guide us. I smiled. And it is your little gray cells that help us navigate the chaos. He chuckled. Oh, Beethoven, the greatest mind cannot escape the echoes of the past. We sat in companionable silence, the house finally quiet, but the memories held lingering grudges of the price of secrets and the hope that comes with their Revelation chapter 17, a promise renewed. Morning light filtered softly through the lace curtains of Greystone Hollow, casting a gentle glow upon the familiar, but now less ominous surroundings. The house, which had once fought like a fortress of secrets, now seemed to breathe with a fragile hope. Attentive, but real Poirot and I took our breakfast in the blue parlor, the room filled with the quiet hum of domestic routine. Judith joined us. Briefly, her expression softened by the weight of recent revelations. There is much to be done, she said, to heal this family and the house. Poirot nodded. Thoughtful healing is a journey, mademoiselle, and it begins with forgiveness, not only of others, but of oneself. Judith's eyes glistened. My uncle wanted that. Bellavito set things right before he left us. As the day wore on, Poirot requested a privé meeting. With more daring, she was in the garden, tending to a patch of late-blooming chrysanthemums. Her fingers, delicate but sure, they spoke quietly, words exchanged like a delicate dance, full of respect and unspoken thirsting. I watched from a distance, sensing that in their conversation laid final threads of a story that had bound them both for decades later. Poirot confided in me. Madame Daring and Sir Hugo shared a bond of duty and regret. They made a promise long ago to protect those who could not protect themselves. That promise has finally been fulfilled. That evening, the family gathered one summer in the drawing room. The atmosphere was calmer, more open. Judith spoke of her plans to restore the house and her hope to bring peace to those who would live with her in the future. Poole addressed them all with quiet authority. The past has been confronted. The truth, unveiling. It is time to look forward. He turned to me. Hastings, our work here is done, but I knew as I looked around the room that the echoes of the past would linger as reminders and lessons for all. We called Greystone Hollow. On the chair, that fest, the wall had finally been turned, not away from the world, but toward the light. Chapter 18, the final curtained, waning days of autumn draped Greystone Hollow in a tapestry of golden crimson. The gardens, yielding to the inevitable approach of winter, yet inside of the manor, a sense of finality hung thick in the air, as though the house itself was preparing for the closing act of a long and weary drama. Poirot and I found ourselves once again in the drawing room, the scene of so many revelations and confessions, now bathed in the soft glow of a dying fire. The family had gathered there, faces marked with the weariness of recent trials, but also with a tentative hope. Poirot's gaze swept the room, taking in each familiar face. Mimi, he began, voice calm yet resonatory. Journey together nears its end. The secrets have been unearthed, guilt confessed, and the shadows dispelled. But before we part ways, there is one truth left to share. A final reflection. He paused, allowing the moment to settle. The story of Greystone Hollow is not merely about murder or secrets, but a both human heart, its capacity for loyalty, for betrayal, for remorse, and for redemption. Sir Hugo's fate was entwined with those he loved and those he sought to protect in his torment. He revealed the fragile complexity of us all. Judith, seated by the window, wiped a tear from her cheek. I never truly knew my uncle until now. He was a man burdened by invisible chains. Ku nodded. And it is those chains we must all strive to break, confronting our pasts, embracing truth, and choosing forgiveness. He turned to me. Hastings, this case has tested our little gray cells and reminded us of the delicate balance between justice and mercy. Smiled, feeling the weight of his words. As the evening deepened, the family began to disperse, each member carrying with them the echoes of a chapter closed and the promise of a new beginning. Poirot stood by the door, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Greystone Hollow will never forget, but perhaps now it can begin to heal. We stepped outside into the crisp night air. The stars above shone with a clarity that felt almost miraculous after so many days of turmoil. Poole took a deep breath. The final curtain falls. Hastings, but every ending is but a prelude to another story. I nodded, knowing that wherever our paths might lead, the lessons of Greystone Hollow would stay with us, quiet reminders of the shadows that linger and the light that follows. Chapter 19. Whispers in the dark nights at Greystone Hollow had grown colder, the windows rattling softly. Inth, autumn wind that whispered through the ancient oaks surrounding the estate. Despite the chill, the house seemed to pulse with a restless energy. Its last murmurs of a story that refused to fade quietly into memory. Poirot and I found ourselves wandering the corridors long after the others had retired. The silence was punctuated only by the distant ticking of clocks and the occasional creak of floorboards settling beneath the weight of Gersmanami. Poirot mused softly. It is curious you even after the truth has been revealed, secrets continue to whisper in the dark. I nodded. You believe there is more beneath the surface? Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Always, the human heart holds many chambers, some locked, some forgotten, and in those shadows dwell echoes of things unsaid or reflections. Were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. It was Juditha, face pale but resolute. I couldn't sleep, she confessed. There's something I need to say. We invited her in. She spoke with a tremor in her voice. At night of my uncle's death, overheard a conversation, fragments of words between Lane and another. Poirot's interest piqued. Fragments to this nodded. They spoke of a promise and of keeping the past buried, but the other voice didn't recognize it. It was low, urgent, and full of fear. Pooh leaned forward. Did you hear the name? No, but the tone suggested something more than loyalty. Perhaps Corin. Poirot's expression darkened. Then, our case is not yet closed. Hastings, there may be others who sought to silence the truth. The next day, Poirot interviewed the household once more, this time with a new focus to uncover the identity of the mysterious second voice. As the interviews progressed, subliminalities emerged and unease settled more deeply within the family. Late that evening, Poole shared his thoughts. Loyalty can be twisted by fear, and promises can become chains. Another voice spoke in the shadows. We must find it before silence claimed Sonather. I felt the weight of his words. The story of Greystone Hollow was far from over. Chapter 20. Justice in the twilight. The final chapter of our tale unfolded under a sky heavy with the weight of impending night. Greystone Hollow, once a silent witness to secrets and sorrow, now braced itself for the resolution that had been so long delayed. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room. One last time, faces weary but resolute, they awaited his words. But the culmination of our investigation, the unveiling of the final truth. Madame's immature Poole began. The shadows that have lingered in this house, he'd been long and deep, but light even in the twilight finds its way. He paced slowly, eyes keenly observing each member of the familiar. New evidence points to a conspiracy of silence, not merely a lone act of desperation. There was another, a partner in secrecy and in guilt. He turned to Judith, your overt hearing of voices was no accident. The other voice belonged to none other than your cousin, Edwin Drake. A sharp intake of breath swept the ruined one's face. Appalled, but he stood firm, I admit. I spoke with Lane that night. We should have feared that the past would ruin us all, but I did not kill. Sir Hercule Poirot nodded. Fear is a powerful motivator, but so is desperation turned toward Claudia. You two knew more than you shared. Your silence was a shield for those you loved. Claudia lowered her gaze. Pooh, addressed. Seth, the mall. Sir Hugo's death was a tragedy born of many hands, a web of fear. Loyalty earned betrayal, but justice demands clarity. He produced a folded document, the signed will recently discovered among Sir Hugo's private papers. The will leaves a estate, not to any of you, but to a charitable trust established by Sir Hugo, a final act of atonement. Judith's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to market things right. Poirot smiled gently. In the end, Hechicito freed those bound by secrets. Inspector Cray stepped forward. Lane and Edwin will face justice for their roles, but we must remember the complexity of human hearts behind this case. Poirot turned to me. Hastings, it is time to leave Greystone Hollow behind, a place of sorrow, but also of healing us. We departed. The house seemed to breathe a final, measured sigh. The chair that once faced the wall was now turned toward the door, a silent invitation to new beginnings. The sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows that promise it. Dawn of Peace, Chapter 21, Epilogue. The quiet aftermath. Weeks had passed since the final revelations at Greystone Hollow. The estate, once a crucible of secrets and tragedy, had begun its slow journey toward healing. The heavy silence that had dominated the manor was gradually replaced by the gentle sounds of life, the rustle of leaves, the distant song of birds, and the soft murmur of voices. No longer burdened by fear, Poirot and I returned one last time. Tough grounds, walking the paths that wound through the gardens, now bursting with late autumn color. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and woods, a promise of renewal. Mon ami Poirot said, "It is remarkable how even the darkest stories can find their light." I nodded. "Do you think the house itself feels different here?" Smiled. "Houses, like people, carry memories, but they also carry hope. Greystone Hollow has been freed from its shadows now. It can rest inside the manor." Judith and the others had begun the work of restoration, not just of the physical space, but of the bonds fractured by years of secret letters, were written apologies, exchanged, and a shared determination to honor Sir Hugo's final wishes. Poirot reflected quietly. "This case has reminded me that justice is not always about punishments amidst. It is about understanding, forgiveness, and the courage to face these past as we prepare to leave for the last time." I glanced back at the house. The chair that once faced the wall now sat quietly by the hearth, its silent witness. Finally, at peace, our journey had ended, but the lessons of Greystone Hollow would linger, a testament to the enduring complexity of human heart. Chapter 22, The Chair That Finally Turned. Final morning at Greystone Hollow dawned, crisp and clear, as if the very earth had decided to shed the weight of the past and welcome a new beginning. The sun spilled golden light across the ancient stone facade, illuminating every nook and cranny that had once been cloaked in shadows. Inside, the household was quiet but purposeful. Judith moved through the rooms with a newfound grace, orchestrating the final preparations to honor her uncle's legacy and to ensure the estate would stand as a symbol of redemption rather than sorrow. Poirot and John had gathered once more in the drawing room, where the chair, the silent sentinel of so many secrets, stood prominently by the hearth. But now something had changed. The chair facing at the wall, but the room itself open and unguarded. Poirot studied it for a moment, then turned to me. The chair that faced the wall was a symbol of denial, of refusing to face the truth. But now, at last, it has turned, it faces the light. The past acknowledged, and the future embraceed, gestured toward. The family gathered nearby, Judith, Edwin, Claudia, Gilbert, each carrying the scars of the past, but stepping forward with hope. Griefstone Hollow will continue, not as a house of secrets, but as a home of truth and reconciliation. This is the promise we leave behind as we prepare to depart. Judith approached Poirot, her eyes bright with gratitude. To thank you, Mia Poo, for bringing light to our darkness, smiled warmly. It is always a privilege, mademoiselle, to help truth find its voice, stepping outside into the fresh morning air. I took one last look at Greystone Hollow, no longer a place of fear, but of promise. The chair that faced the wall had finally turned, and with it, a new chapter began.